Hello, my name is Dr. Jenny Koenig, and I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the work that we've been doing about teaching about ethnicity in the context of pharmacokinetics. So the first question is, what should we teach? So we did a scoping review, which was published back in 2021. And three key points from this were that over two-thirds of the papers showed no difference between ethnic groups. There were lots of different mechanisms reported that are responsible for generally inter-individual variation between humans. This included genetic variation, but also diet, environment, lifestyle, and so on. But what was notable was that the language in these papers really referred to ethnicity in terms of white, black, Asian, African. You might think of these as the sort of continental scale racial groupings. Then the next question was, how should we teach? This is where we took lessons from genomics education research. And this points out this idea of genetic essentialism, which is the mistaken belief that same race individuals are genetically homogeneous and that most racial differences are therefore determined by genes, which is clearly wrong. Furthermore, Brian Donovan's group showed that students who learn about racial differences in the prevalence of disease are more likely to agree with a genetic argument for racial inequality. But the good news is that better genomics education can reduce racism, and therefore that's an important message for pharmacogenomics educators to take away. So therefore, in this paper, what we wanted to know was how our students understand ethnicity and what effect our teaching has on this. The study methodology included pre and post questionnaires, either side of our scheduled examinable teaching, and then a few weeks later, followed by some focus groups to get in at some of the more nuanced ideas. And this had ethical approval. So, the answer to how our students understand ethnicity is that there are very many different ways that students can think about this. The most common response was words relating to culture, traditions, and so on, followed by place of origin, geography, nationality, and then other contributions from genetics, ancestry, race, and appearance. And many students gave answers that included many of these different categories. So this is really in contrast to the way ethnicity is framed in the pharmacokinetics literature, which is more about the sort of continental scale racial groupings of white, black, and so on. We asked a number of questions, but one example to try and get at how they think about ethnicity in pharmacokinetics asked the question, study has shown some ethnic groups differ in the rate at which they metabolize a drug. Which of the following mechanisms do you think might underlie this difference? And the largest response was mostly genetic, followed by both genetic and environmental. But after the teaching, there was a significant shift away from the mostly genetic response towards more recognition of what we called environmental or non-genetic factors. So clearly, the way we were presenting our teaching was having a good effect. The focus groups were really fascinating. I think what surprised me was that a lot of students didn't really know what to think because they had no previous teaching about ethnicity and genetic variation. Some did recognize a previous misconception, so previously thinking that everything's mainly down to genetics, but now being able to see the influence of environmental factors. So I think that was a message for our overall curriculum that we needed to include teaching around ethnicity and genetics and talk about environmental factors as well as genetic mechanisms. So that's just a taster of some of the findings from that paper. It was a fascinating study to carry out, and the reference is there as published last year. Thank you very much.